The Pat Mayo Experience.
Pat Mayo Experience. Pat Mayo Experience. Pat Mayo Experience. Experience.
Welcome to the Pat Mayo Experience presented by Underdog. Digging into a special show today. We're going live on YouTube. We're live on X, live on Facebook. So you good people, if you want to ask a question, I'll be monitoring the YouTube chat. If you have questions for Jeff or Ryan from covers.com about the industry stuff, ESPN Bet is shutting down. ESPN has a new deal with DraftKings, and Penn, which was in collaboration with ESPN Bet, is now putting everything to the Score app. Ryan, do I have that right?
You got it. Nailed it.
Jeff, like ESPN, or it's not ESPN, Penn has done a deal with Barstool that did not work out whatsoever, and they sold it back to Portnoy for $1 to do this deal with ESPN, which also now hasn't worked whatsoever. What's happening at Penn?
Well, they're just the thesis that they have kind of makes sense, where they are traditionally a brick and mortar casino company, the clientele of which is older and getting older. And so they have been looking for ways to try to find younger customers that will come to them and play with them, as some of these older customers, age out, as they call it, or pass away. So the idea would be that for them was to create these partnerships with these high profile entities that have, really good, solid, brand recognition, if you want to call it, with that younger audience. And it just hasn't panned out for various reasons. And it's been a very costly exercise for Penn.
So, Ryan, trying to think into it a little bit more, I theorized this on the Best Bet show I did today with Rob Pizzola, Cam Stewart. Rob and I were talking about this very briefly, and I didn't want to blow it all there. I want to talk to you guys about it. But is it just more the concept that Barstool did lean into this very heavily? So I don't quite understand why it didn't work out with Barstool, but at least for ESPN, it did feel like when you watched a lot of the personalities that they didn't really care to push it. It felt like an obligation to push rather than targeting the type of people that would like to talk about betting all the time. I know they had the Joe Fortenbaugh show. I like Joe. Joe's great. He can pump that, but your run-of-the-mill, average, high-end, very visible ESPN personality just wasn't good at explaining to people what this is. Or is it the clientele? I can't figure it out.
It's a lot of everything like that. One of the biggest misconceptions too was that ESPN didn't run that sports book. It just gave the name to it. So there's this idea that people like Stephen A. Smith was giving picks because it was rigging the book, or they're trying to stack the odds. So there was none of that either. The thing is, ESPN got a flat fee, $150 million a year for the licensing. So you have that. You have people who grew up around sports, not necessarily sports betting. There is obviously overlap, but they're very different. So yeah, you could tell there was the lack of interest there. There was the public misconception. There's also the misconception that the NBA, FBI, Terry Rozier, Chauncey Billups scandal had something to do with this. This was long in the works. So you have that. ESPN is the luster is gone as people have gone to these other opportunities. They've gone to sports betting media. ESPN is not the only option anymore. There's so many different things with it. So you have all these different aspects there where ESPN just wasn't at all the partner that I think people thought they might be going into this. Barstool, you mentioned, was a little bit different because they were very gambling focused. So in that way, you had kind of almost more your demographic. ESPN is just, it's a bigger, wider demographic. You have people who can't bet. You have a lot of states where people can't bet in. And then B, ESPN is just changing. Politically, the reputation has changed. People are getting their news in more in different ways. And then the final note, just to wrap it all up, to the original question that Jeff touched on, I think the problem, too, is just they weren't FanDuel and DraftKings. They jumped in way too late. FanDuel and DraftKings had already built up a DFS database, which is more attuned to sports betting. They just, and they had a better platform. That was the biggest thing. FanDuel and DraftKings had these better customer setups. They had these customers that have been around for a long time. They didn't want to switch. ESPN provided them nothing that made them switch. And ESPN, despite all this investment, could never catch up to the tech advantages, which is when we say tech in the industry, we mean how well you can single game parlay, how well you can live single game parlay. ESPN Bet just joined too late to the race. And I think that's maybe the biggest factor. They just weren't DraftKings and FanDuel.
It's funny to think of it that way, Jeff, because this is a discussion that we had when we launched the Fantasy Sports Network in 2014. I was like the first on-air person, the first employee of that network. We're going to do a Fantasy Sports Network live. I mean, we're going to have extra content. Some of it's recorded, but 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, you can tune into this TV channel to do that. And the very first thing that I brought up when we got in, it's like, why are we getting into terrestrial TV? Shouldn't this be like a streaming network? Shouldn't this be online? Like, are people really going to be flicking through the channels and stop it here? With the idea being that, hey, if we could ingrain ourselves that way, maybe people will have us on in bars or doctors' offices like Bloomberg is on or CNN is on, whatever it might be. That was sort of the idea with a very fancy ticker. But we were so late to the game that the game was basically over by the time we got in. And eventually it shut down within like 3 years because it didn't make sense as a business model. And now that you have like places like, hey, this show is sponsored by Underdog. Love Underdog. Use code Mayo at Underdog right now and get yourself some bonuses, some free picks, bonus bets. It's all there for you. But Underdog is a different product than DraftKings and FanDuel. So it was able to carve out a niche in the market and grow. Prize Picks did exactly the same thing. Like those two companies were able to wedge themselves in, get into markets where other places weren't, and have a really good, reliable product that people really liked. And now what we're seeing now is we have all of these prediction markets coming in that it felt like ESPN Bet they were never going to get any sort of market share, and they kind of got into, I don't want to say a dead business, but a business where it was just impossible to grow.
Absolutely. And it kind of reminds me a little bit of banking in some ways where, you're born, you grow up in a neighborhood, there's a bank down the street, you get an account with that bank, and then you just find yourself, really hesitant to switch, even if there might be like a better offer or something out there. And, a lot of people kind of were grandfathered into the big two with DraftKings and FanDuel. And so trying to crack that duopoly, it takes some doing. It takes coming to market with like a new innovative product or just something different that people aren't getting with their current sportsbook operator. I know I'm based in Ontario. Everyone I know seemingly uses Bet365, and as much as I tell them to that shop around, that there are so many other books, it's really hard to convince people to move money around and to do things. And so you're really up against it, especially with those pre-existing big operators there. And with ESPN too, I mean, ESPN Bet too, like it's a very tricky thing with mixing those brands together, because ESPN has long had this presence in the sports world where it's just so crucial to providing information and statistics to people who are sports fans and who are sports bettors. And in some ways, I think people kind of like having a bit of a firewall between those two things, where you don't necessarily want to get sports betting advice from someone you would get really good, football X's and O's analysis. It's really, it might kind of rub people the wrong way. And I think, when you bring them together, you end up with some awkward situations as well. I mean, we saw recently with the announcement of, criminal charges pertaining to, alleged use of non-public information to bet on NBA games. ESPN's doing news hits on it, and there's the ESPN Bet ticker at the bottom. And there was one funny situation people kind of captured online where they just wiped away the ESPN Bet, logo from it. So it was, they were already kind of up against it. And they were facing just a lot of challenges just from, a business perspective too. And then there are just all these other things where it comes down to, the people you're trying to attract to your sports book. And just, again, as you noted, prediction markets, the landscape for what's legal and what's available continues to change and shift under their feet as they're doing that. And today on, PENN's earnings call, you had some commentary from their CEO, Jay Snowden, and he was, very, he was speaking very almost apocalyptic like of prediction markets and their potential, saying, it's a very real threat for us. And this is an existential kind of crisis that we have to deal with. And you're dealing with that while you're also trying to just deal with win against, normal state-regulated sports books. So it's just a very challenging situation overall for anyone trying to break into the market.
Ryan, one of the conversations that I've been having, I'm getting pretty old at this point, but 10 years, 15 years, like I remember just the discussion about micro betting. Just every time you would get into a room with someone, it's like, sports betting is one thing, but micro betting is the wave of the future. Now, maybe eventually they'll be right. I heard the same thing about esports too. Like, man, if we just crack this esports market, there's so much money to be had. But it turns out that those people just didn't want to bet on esports. They wanted to watch esports or play esports. They wanted to consume it in the ways that they wanted to consume it. Putting it on ESPN didn't really do anything like that. And the other big thing that I found is trying to turn people who are not active gamblers or have interest in gambling into betting. I'm sure, listen, you cast a wide enough net, you're going to get enough people. But it felt like to me, the ESPN audience, if people weren't sports betting anyway and watching ESPN, those conversions were just going to be really tough. And maybe they just don't exist. Like there's a certain segment of people who just want nothing to do with sports betting.
Yeah, it was more than we ever realized. I mean, I think back in 2018, I was like, oh man, if ESPN did this, everyone would jump in. I thought, we had Churchill Downs, and it had Twin Spires, which before gambling, and I have a bet on horses. That was like a big deal. It's like, oh, this is going to work. And Churchill Downs and Twin Spires left really early. ESPN, obviously, they jumped in late with it, but the ship had sailed. I think it's very true. It's much more than we realized how big that firewall, and Jeff touched on it, is. There was something about a year ago, they had an earnings call and they were excited because if you integrated the ESPN Bet Sportsbook with the ESPN app, you got a $10 bonus bet. And I was one of those people who did. It was like, sure, $10 bonus bet. That's awesome. Well, they got like the first couple months, they got like 250,000 people or something to do that. Well, they have 25 million people on their app that use it every month. So it was 0.01% of people took the free bet. Now you take into account that there's international users and people under 21 in states that it's not live and all these different things with it. But it was a very small fraction of people who even took that bet. We're also looking overall. There's this talk about sports betting and how big a deal it is. And yes, it is. And there was $150 billion wagered on sports last year. That number is going to be even higher this year. But if you look at it, there's only at most about 10 million people in America who are using a sports book at least once a month. At all, just maybe putting $10 on a Sunday parlay or something like that. There's just not that many sports bettors after all of the hundreds of millions of dollars spent on advertising, after all the hand wringing. Every major national media outlet has had some story about how sports betting is the end of the world and the demise of young men and society and all these things with it. But you look at it, it's just sports betting itself is a kind of a small deal in the big scheme of things. And even among sports bettors, the vast majority of sports fans should say, you're right. They don't want anything to do with sports betting. So if your business model was, we're going to go after sports fans, well, it's probably a little bit better than maybe going after, moms or, retirement homes, maybe something different than that, different demographics. But it's still, there's just not a translation to it. What we're looking at is what you got to do is you have to have the best product. And I'll stress that again, that is the key, is you have to have people interested. And again, it's those single game parlays. This is what people are talking about. When we look at micro betting or anything with it, that concept overall, which is obviously in the news now, but that is what people want. They want those lottery tickets. They want to stack 10 game ridiculous things that won't hit, but they just want that hope that it will hit. There's very few people too who are just grinding and taking advantage. Jeff touched on Ontario. I live in Florida. We only have Hard Rock Bet, and I visit my friends in other states, and they have all these sports books, and I get so excited. And they're the same deal. They just stick with one or maybe two. They don't want to transition. They don't want to transfer. They don't want to create new accounts. They're not there for value. They're just there for parlays. And that's the vast majority of that sports bettor, who again is a small percentage of sports fans, which is a small percentage of the people overall.
Jeff, what would you say that the breakdown would be between people who are like, listen, I'm not I bet a lot on sports. I like to bet on sports. It's part of my job to do that. Not that I'm a professional sports bettor, but I need to be betting at different places. I even find myself, like sometimes I will bet, I'll take a slightly worse number at a place where I have more money on it. Just like more money in that book at the time, because I don't want to redeposit somewhere to get the bet size that I want to get on something or whatever it might be. There is something that's familiar about that, but I do have basically accounts at every single book, depending on where I'm at, where I can utilize them. What would you say the split between someone like me, who not a pro, not grinding every single day, but immersed in the space, versus your casual player? Like, is that a 9-to-1 ratio? If people be like, I play on DraftKings, I'll only play on DraftKings.
I think, it's probably what you just laid out right there. I think the majority of players are your still very casual, very, one book at a time kind of player. And, to Ryan's point as well, there's just a huge population in both Canada and the US that they just have no interest in betting on sports at all. There was a survey that just came out yesterday that was done by YouGov, this polling firm. They asked a lot of people, and they asked, as part of their survey, they just asked, have you ever bet money on sports? And the answer came back, only around a quarter of people they surveyed actually had bet on any sports at all. So, then if you take that sliver and then you go look into that sliver of, how many people in there are like actually price shopping and looking around, it just gets so much more, it just gets smaller. And so that is one of the, the big challenges of legalized sports betting altogether, is that, part of the idea of legalizing and regulating sports betting is to create a way to transition wagering that's happening with an offshore book or someone who's unregulated or just unwanted in any jurisdiction to start using some of these, locally regulated options. And in Ontario, for example, you have around 30 online sports books people can choose from. And so you do have a lot of choice there. And so that's it's still a tricky thing where it's trying to tell people that there are these competitive markets and getting them to move over. But I just think still, like, the vast majority of sports bettors are very wedded to, perhaps the first sports book they come across, the one that offers them the deal that catches their eye, the commercial they see, or perhaps even the ones that are, grandfathered in with DFS and other products, and they just stick around. And so it's really a tricky thing trying to nail down the preferences of any given sports bettor, because, not everyone wants to bet on the same stuff. Not everyone's even interested in betting. I mean, I personally like to bet on some very weird things. I don't know if every sports book has that weird stuff I want. So it's just, it is, I think, a very small percentage of the overall population, and then also too of the population of sports bettors that's availing themselves of everything they possibly could.
You hit on the DFS database, and it seems pretty intuitive, Ryan, that if you had a DFS account for the past 15 years, either with DraftKings or FanDuel, that migrating over to that was just very easy. They even have buttons in the app where you can jump over to their sportsbook to claim a bonus, sign up, and your money might even transfer over depending on where you are. I was actually surprised, and maybe because it was PENN, basically it's a white label PENN product with an ESPN banner on it, but like their ability to not tie in the ESPN fantasy football app to ESPN Bet, like as a better integration, felt like it was leaving a lot of money on the table.
It's kind of, in retrospect, it's kind of crazy to think now, like it was just this football season that they started doing that. And it was still kind of limited, they, on top of everything else, they launched in November 2023. So they missed the core of the football season. August is for sports books. That's sign-up season. That's when you get people fired up. That's when your fantasy draft, that's when you think your team can go undefeated. Like that's where you need it. So they missed that season. They weren't ready in 2024. Like they didn't have all that integration ready even then. And so they started in 2025, and by then the ship has sailed. So that's absolutely right. Like it's just a huge part of it. And again, it ties in with it. There's Jeff, who we've talked about. I know he's betting 4th tier Polish soccer overnights, of course. He's anytime goal scorers, right? For bench warmers. But for the vast majority, it is. I think I don't have the numbers. I don't think anyone quite does, but it is close to that 9-1, 10-1. It's single digits, 10% of people who are really active sports bettors. That I kind of mentioned, there's about 10 million-ish people in the legal regulated sports books. Of that, the vast majority are just placing kind of just a bet here or there. It's not a big deal with it. And it's just, they're not going to switch to ESPN just because Stephen A. Smith did it. And I'll say on my personal note, I mean, they needed to do a better, this is entirely me just waxing. They needed to do a better job of like saying fade Stephen A. Smith, or someone I don't like fade Mike Greenberg. I think some of these people are almost, they're watched because they're unpopular. People get very animated about Pat McAfee. Make that a big deal. This is Pat's pick. Fade it or something. There was even stuff like that they missed. So there were just so many opportunities that they had with the ESPN brand and the name. So on top of the macro level issues we've hammered home with, it's just hard to switch sports books. The brand is changing. People's preferences are changing, all that stuff. Even what they did have, which was still these personalities, which has become a big deal, ESPN's business model, this app, which is the fantasy app, which is really good. The Score app, which is, their sports betting app, which is probably not as good as the Scores. All these assets they had, it didn't even put those in right positions to succeed. So you can see why all of this ends up happening. Again, they didn't even make it to the 3-year line. This was 2 years out of a 10-year deal. And it just, again, it's easy when in retrospect, but now it's become pretty clear how we're at this position right now.
Well, it's funny too, Jeff, because ESPN they were printing money because they were getting such a great deal on the cable subs, but then cable started going away, and then they were late to getting to ESPN Plus, and they fell behind some of the other streamers. They seem to have caught up on that front right now, but it seems like they're just constantly behind. Like whoever has been running ESPN, when they were a startup in the 80s and then through the 90s, through the early 2000s, it felt like they were at the forefront of decision making when it came to how to gamify sports, how to get out in front of whatever the next big thing was going to be. But now it just feels like they're constantly playing catch up to a lot of these tech startups.
Yeah, it does. And, it's kind of funny because you see a lot of leagues that are, they're not perhaps the top tier leagues that look to sports betting as kind of like a silver bullet to really give interest in what they're putting out there, a shot in the arm. And I kind of see some similarities that way where ESPN's sort of working backwards here, where it's like, well, we'll just throw some sports betting into the mix and that'll just, really juice things a little bit. And it just doesn't always work that way. It's, again, it kind of goes back to this, and this is not substantiated in any way, but I have a bit of a feeling that, people tune into ESPN for certain things. They want to see the games. They want to hear some hot takes, perhaps, and get stirred up about that. And they want information. They want, they want the chef bombs. They want the Woj bombs. They want things like that. They want information. And I know as a sports bettor, I want that information too. I want to hear what they have to say about game strategy, about what coaches and players are saying. And I can factor that into my, betting, in my betting analysis. And for whatever reason, it hasn't quite meshed as well as it could with ESPN and ESPN Bet, where you're taking some insight you heard on the network and you're immediately flipping over to ESPN Bet to make a bet. And for some people it obviously does, but it just hasn't. And I think part of it, again, you touched on it there, where they're sort of coming at it at a way that's behind the curve, where we're already kind of moving into new things and trying different things and coming up with business models that are different from what had come before. And sometimes the differences are regulatory and legal. And here I'm talking about prediction markets, where they are now making themselves, and they are able to make themselves available using some interesting
trickery,
loopholes, interpretations of federal law, where if you're in Texas right now, you don't have ESPN Bet, but you do perhaps have access to a prediction market you could use. And so you're tuning into ESPN and maybe watching it there, but then you can't take that next step into ESPN Bet. So you have to take the information you're gleaning from that programming and take it somewhere else. And so that's just another hurdle that ESPN Bet had to overcome. And it was a bit later in the game, granted, but the state regulated sports books are regulated by the states and they're restricted there in what they can do. And there are some entities that aren't right now. And so that's just another challenge that they had to overcome. And that technological difference, again, it might be the reading of the law and the reading of regulation that allows them to do it. But we're already kind of on to a new thing, and they're trying to do something that's already kind of had its day in some ways.
Shockingly enough, Ryan, this probably will not surprise you, but ESPN operates like a lot of the conversations that I've had with the PGA Tour about integrating betting into their product and how to properly do that versus what they do now. And it just seems like, they have new management, and that has actually been very positive for conversations that I've been having both with them, with Golf Channel, and like just the entire new team that's coming in and taking everything over. But for the past 5 years, trying to talk to the PGA Tour is like they didn't even understand the concept of gambling.
Yeah, it's a different whole environment, and I think but it's ESPN's promotion with it. It's also, that's part of the problem with it too, right? It's ESPN gave the brand to PENN. PENN had to take it, so they had the tech aspect, they had to do work, all of that stuff with it. But then also PENN couldn't necessarily tell the ESPN personalities what to say. So you're on top of that too. I think it's kind of with Jeff with it. It's, hey, you know what? Maybe ESPN, maybe they go into prediction markets because that's not a sports book. They're allowed to do that. It's a whole different animal with it. It's you're one step back, and it's innovation. It's innovate or die. the FanDuel and DraftKings, as we're looking at the legality of these prediction markets, they're on top of it. They're going to be there, in one way or another. They're monitoring closely. They don't want to jeopardize their sports betting licenses right now, but that's something there with it too. And so ESPN has changed. I think you touched on it, Pat, earlier, how much things have also changed with that cable subscription. When the ESPN's success was because you basically had to pay them, whether you watched them or not, $10 a month-ish, based off your cable bill, the way cable bills were divided. One of the kind of interesting, underappreciated stories about the change in sports, and we could go on all about that too, with the macro level changes in that. But it's like that altered their telemetry. They were never quite ready for that change. It was the only business model. It's so interesting, and streaming has its own issues, but cable was the only business model where you had to pay for something that you absolutely would never use. Majority of people don't even watch ESPN. As crazy it is, even when they had cable at its height, it was still a small fraction of it, but it got a huge part of that cable bill went to ESPN and part of their negotiations and so on and so forth. So, I mean, it all ties in together. You can see, again, 100 different ways to dissect it, but why we're today, ESPN Bet is no more.
Someone in the chat says that esports is the third most bet on thing in, sports betting in the world. We're not really talking about the world here, though, are we, Jeff? We're talking about North America.
We are talking about North America, and I guess I would ask for the source on that. I think, clearly soccer or football around the world is very popular. I know in Asia that there are games like League of Legends and things like that are hugely popular and that people bet on. So there might be something there, but in North America, esports is still just like a sliver of what people are betting on, and it hasn't quite blown up in the same way as probably people had hoped. And that, again, just goes to the fact where it's like, just because you add sports betting to something, it's not necessarily going to make people flock to that sport.
Well, this is something else that I wanted to drill down on. I don't know if either one of you guys have an opinion on this, but 10, 15 years ago, when this was all starting to ramp up, first starting with regular fantasy into daily fantasy, then the overall legalization on a state level of sports betting, it was good for people like me who had an audience of people who were ready to consume this stuff. They came to me, other people like me, to talk to the audience about, hey, and I was with DraftKings at the time. I was with DraftKings for 8 years. Like, hey, play on DraftKings. And then by the time the sports betting came around, bet on DraftKings, that kind of thing. And then all of the money from that space for people like me kind of got sucked out and pushed a lot of people out because they started spending their money on things like ESPN or Fox, the big networks, or even big influencers who maybe had nothing to do with sports, or even bigger sports personalities who had nothing to do with betting. And it really does seem to me like that was very bad money spent. Like, Dan Orlovsky wasn't selling people on coming to bet. He sells people on good football takes.
Yeah, I think that's a very hard thing to quantify exactly, who people trust. But I do think that authenticity is a huge part of who's talking about sports betting and whether or not people are going to take what they're hearing from that person and actually bet on stuff. And so I know when I listen to the PME and I hear you talk about golf, you are very much somebody who's invested in it. You've got all the scars, you wear them proudly and talking about some stuff, and you've had some big wins along the way. And so when I hear you talk about golf, I'm like, this guy gets it. He gets the struggle, and he's been there before. And it's different when you're just then trying to bring in professional athletes or influencers who don't have that same kind of street cred, so to speak, about betting, and then get them talking about betting. And I think it's a big leap to get people to be like, yes, I trust you now with betting the same way I trusted you with talking about the X's and O's of a football game. I think that's tough.
And I think it's a lot to do too, Ryan, about like what you actually talk about. Like, no one's really coming to me for like good picks. Everyone knows I have like the worst picks in history, but people like to watch the show. But if I tell them like, hey, if you use this sports book, like you'll get paid out on time. They have good odds here versus other places. I feel like people trust me with that sort of information versus, hey, here's who you need to bet on, which is totally the opposite of what I think that some of these companies are paying people to do.
Yeah, in all seriousness, ESPN should have hired you or someone with it. I think they should have, make ESPN News like ESPN Bet Live. I know they have the show, but like really like hammer that home. And they could have done like alternate casts,
They did
ESPN
this.
Plus.
They did this
just
with
like
golf.
more.
They had the
Okay.
ESPN Bet feed, and it was horrible. It was it goes back to those meetings about micro betting. It's like, well, we got to push micro betting. It's like no one wants to bet on what the approach shot is going to be on this hole. That's not a real thing that people bet on.
Well, I guess, and the problem is also we talk about the size of sports. I mean, esports in the U.S. is not even a rounding error. It's imperceptible how little handle it gets. Hockey is low single digits. Golf is low single digits. I mean, it's harder to do, but they should have done it on a Monday Night Football. I mean, that's what you got to do, where you get tens of millions of dollars in handle on that. That's the kind of thing with it. My apologies, I didn't even realize they tried it with golf. But yeah, golf is not. It's just never going to move the needle. Again, the assets ESPN, it has Monday Night Football. Do a betcast. Get people with good followings who are in the betting space. Have them talking to it. Similar to the Manning cast. Do this for the betting cast. At least try that. Try something different. You know, these resources they had, they did not put them into use.
Well, we're going to come back and talk about the new deal that ESPN has with DraftKings. And I really want to talk about the impact and the future and how prediction markets have shaken everything up. So please sub to the channel if you got a question. You got to be subbed in order to ask, smash like, and turn those notifications on right now, and maybe buy a Helix mattress. You know how much time I spend researching bets and lineups and shows and getting everything ready for you? So when it's actually time to sleep, I need it to count. That's why I switched to a Helix mattress, and honestly, game changer. I have Helix mattresses all over my house. My wife and I have one. The guest room has one. My kids have one. I got a kid on the way, and eventually they're going to have one too. Even Jared over at the studio living there, I got him a Helix mattress as well. Populated with Helix, you need to do it too. I used to wake up with a stiff back and night sweats. Now I just sleep through the night. No tossing around, no overheating. It's just comfortable and supportive. I took their quiz, I tailored it to myself, and boom, I got exactly what I needed from the mattress I deserve. I think you deserve a nice one too. So go to helixsleep.com/Mayo for 27% off and exclusive to Pat Mayo Experience listeners. That's helixsleep.com/Mayo for 27% off. Make sure to enter my show name after checkout so they know I sent you. helixsleep.com/Mayo. You know that moment before the night out when you're excited but also thinking, tomorrow might be rough? Yeah, I've been there. Sure have. And that's why I've started using pre-alcohol from ZBiotics. Total game changer. ZBiotics pre-alcohol probiotic drink is the world's first genetically engineered probiotic, built by PhD scientists to tackle those tough mornings after drinking. Here's how it works. When you drink, alcohol creates an unwanted byproduct in your gut, and that's what makes it hard the next day. Pre-alcohol is designed to break down that byproduct. Now, I drink pre-alcohol as my first drink of the night, and the next morning, good to go. So if you want to enjoy every day, head to zbiotics.com/PatMayo and use code PATMayo for 15% off your first order. And it's backed by a 100% money-back guarantee. So there's no risk, only better mornings. Coming back with the Covers crew to break down the shutdown of the ESPN Bet app. The new thing that ESPN has done, Ryan, is partner up with DraftKings. Is this an exclusive deal? Because we have something like this in Canada. Jeff, maybe you can speak on that in a second about what TSN has been doing up north of the border. But if it's not an exclusive deal, I don't know why they would do this.
Yeah, I think the term was like a singularly officially exclusive. It was something like that. It was a very, very specific one. And DraftKings is usually pretty uptight with that. So yeah, the big thing we're looking at is that it's funny. For a moment there, I was like, wow, maybe ESPN and Disney, they're going to turn away from betting. It'll still be a small part of it. And maybe the scandals or whatever, or just they're going to, no, DraftKings is basically just going to fill the same void that ESPN Bet did. You're still going to see DraftKings advertising. You'll see DraftKings lines. A little trivia. It's kind of fun that when this first started, Caesars William Hill provided the lines. Then it was ESPN Bet PENN, and now it'll be DraftKings. So when you look at the lines at the bottom of the scoreboard, or excuse me, the scoreboard bug, you'll see that too. So it'll just be a little bit different with it. Disney still sees the potential. Sports betting is not going anywhere. DraftKings sees the potential. Interestingly enough, they have a big partnership with PENN, who used to have what is now ESPN Bet, Barstool Bet. So it's just everything with it. There's still going to be a lot of betting, and we're going to see just more DraftKings on ESPN.
Jeff, this reminds me of just a good marketing deal. It's not like you have to use there's no ESPN branded DraftKings app. They'll have stuff within the site. I'm sure they'll make content around it, but this is more of just a brand awareness kind of thing for one of the two big ones to try to stay ahead of FanDuel in that market. But in Canada on TSN is like, it's a completely FanDuel exclusive. They do interstitial content during their live broadcast about like what to bet. I actually think they do a pretty good job of that stuff, but I absolutely have no idea whether it actually moves the needle for signups. I would wager it doesn't.
Yeah, again, just a real hard thing to nail down how much it actually does for them. But, I do think like you that they do a pretty good job of it. They have Davis Sanchez who's talking and like someone who knows his way around a sports book and giving some interesting, props out there. And it's done in a way that, it doesn't bother me all too much. I think they're perfectly good spots. The one thing I would point out, though, is that in Canada, we're seeing right now some real pushback against just any of that type of advertising, like that intermission content, seeing sportsbook ads on the boards during a hockey game. And there's actually like legislation making its way through. It just passed the Senate in Ottawa and now is moving over to the House of Commons that would look to, put national restrictions around sports betting related advertising. And that is due in no small part to that advertising you see during sporting events. It's actually, prompting some lawmakers to try to do something about it, to try to, some of them are talking about a whistle-to-whistle ban on sports betting ads. So while it may be effective, and we don't really know the effectiveness of it, it's actually starting to grate on some people. It's great on some people enough in power that they're now moving this legislation through Parliament, trying to crack down on it. So maybe that does speak to a little bit of the effectiveness of it, that they're trying to restrict it further. But yeah, it's again, you don't know for certain, but people are definitely paying attention because it takes a lot to get any piece of gambling legislation introduced in Parliament altogether. And now, this one has actually had, made some ground up, and there's some traction behind it.
Can you imagine anything like that happening in the United States, Ryan?
No. Next question. Yeah, it's nationwide. Congress is not going to do anything because they can't even figure out how to stay open. There's big talk. If your listeners, I'm sure, have seen viewers, like the gambling tax deduction bill, which everyone in Congress agrees should pass. That they can't get that done. So no, there won't be anything at the federal level. At the state level, though, we have to watch this, and there are. We got 39, soon to be 39 states with some form of legal sports betting, 39 different regulatory bodies, and some of them are much more proactive than others. Some of them like to jump into the fray, and some of them like to make headlines, to be frank. So we're definitely going to look at this. The marketing has been a huge deal. There is an act in Congress. There's been multiple acts since 2018 to try to get some sort of big whistle-to-whistle ban or other restrictions on advertising. They won't go anywhere because nothing goes anywhere in Congress. But it just shows that political will does exist somewhere. Would it shock me if one state does something a little crazy, or at least attempts to? No, I think, especially in the U.S., most states' legislative sessions begin 2026. Lawmakers looking to make headlines, lawmakers looking to do something. I could absolutely see a bill or two or many introduced across the country in different states. Will those pass? Probably not. The gaming industry is pretty strong. The sports betting industry, they don't want these. They fought them off before. But with each one of these, it becomes more and more prominent. Lawmakers do, and they look at their constituents, but they see what they're looking at. Sometimes in the U.S. that companies and all that will advertise specifically in the D.C. market just to get politicians to do something because they know they're in D.C., they're watching TV with it. So when they see continued this, kind of a bit of a misconception that the sports betting ads are all the time. They're no more prevalent than any other industry. They just are kind of standing out because they are gambling. There's always just this concern. There's always with this. When you see these deals, it definitely raises suspicion again. When you see FBI raids, things like this, it raises suspicion, gets people interested. But right now, is that critical mass there at the congressional level? Absolutely not. And at the state level, we're still got a while to go before I think we see something really meaningful. Though, again, it will be discussed. Absolutely.
And I just want to jump in and say, too, like, some of the marketing created headaches for Penn with ESPN Bet and with Barstool. There was actually, I remember spending hours watching Massachusetts Gaming Commission meetings where they were pushing Penn on, what did this Mr. Big Cat mean when he talked about this can't lose parlay? Does he mean it actually can't lose? Or there was also an issue with an ESPN personality who made a quip about a bet that they were putting out there as being something like a risk-free investment, and they had to go before the regulators and explain themselves and deal with fines and that sort of thing. So marketing, while you may not have some sort of nationwide crackdown in the U.S., you do, because of the state level regulation of sports betting in so many ways, and every regulator handles it differently and with different degrees of seriousness. There were still some marketing related headaches that Penn had to deal with its partners.
I didn't want to say Massachusetts specifically, but yeah, if anything comes, it's going to be out of there. That was hilarious watching them just like, yeah, Mr. Cat. So can this parlay lose? And it had lost like every single time ever. And he now jokes about it's like I am by law, like it's proven I am a losing bettor. It's in the record of the state legislature or whatever, state regulators.
I mean, if anyone is out there telling you that they're a winning bettor, I mean, unless they're a big aberration, they're probably lying.
Yeah.
Like big
No,
wins
that's
happen, but yeah, you don't hear much about the. I mean, Jeff, you said before, like I have had some big wins. I haven't had any big losses. I've just had continued losses over time. Sometimes it all goes that way when you're pumping, especially betting on golf every single week, then football every single week. I do better on the sports I don't actually watch because I just trust a computer to make educated guesses for me. There's no heart in it for that. I want to talk about prediction.
It's crazy on Twitter that when you see there's just thousands of winning bettors. I can't believe it.
I mean, it's shocking that more of these places don't go out of business with everyone winning. Prediction markets. So, I mean, obviously, I'm with Underdog in full disclosure. They're the title sponsor of this show. I'm also with CoolBet in Canada as a sportsbook, which is the outside of Ontario jurisdiction. Love both places. I think everyone should play at both those places. But Underdog has been very malleable in what they've been doing. So can you guys tell me a little bit about this fantasy sports ban that was happening in California that had shaken up someone like Underdog and Prize Picks? But Prize Picks is now, they've launched a book, I believe, in North Carolina. I think Missouri sportsbook wise, I believe they're in prediction markets as well. They seem to be right now the best equipped at kind of getting themselves. I mean, let's be honest about it. A lot of this is just getting around whatever the regulation is, isn't it?
For sure. And I mean, we could talk about California specifically for an hour, 2 hours all day if you wanted to. It's a very unique gambling market. But the DFS situation there, I'll try to be as brief as possible, is you had the Attorney General of California come forward with his opinion that daily fantasy is illegal under California law. And, he had a lot of, words to back that up too. But it also comes in the context of the fact that the California gambling market is highly controlled by the state's Native American tribes that have been granted exclusivity over basically all forms of casino gambling in the state. Most of them, I should say. There are some card rooms and things like that. And so it comes in the context of that, where these tribes they had an issue a few years ago where the online sportsbook operators put a measure on the ballot and tried to legalize statewide online sports betting without going through the tribes, and the tribes fought back and won. And, there's still a lot of tension from that situation. And the tribes now are looking to get more clarity with consumers, with law enforcement, with regulators in the state over what is and what isn't legal, because, they're trying to protect their business. And so that's animating a lot of this efforts in the state to crack down on forms of gambling that the tribes don't like and that some lawmakers may not like. And that's what happened with this DFS opinion, where the AG came out and just said, like, no, we don't think that's legal. And then that forces the operators to adapt, and we've seen them adapting in some very interesting ways, such as with prediction markets.
So, Ryan, just to step in here for 1 second, because this happened in, what the hell guy's the AG's name? Schneiderman in New York. During the DFS days, this happened. They shut down daily fantasy sports. They shut down DraftKings and FanDuel. I don't even remember if it was like Star Street or Draft Street were still around at that time. But then people in New York couldn't play anymore. And then they had to go lobby, and they eventually got it overturned. It feels like the same thing is going to happen to prediction markets soon, or they're just buying their way in and did it smartly.
Yeah, prediction markets is going to be the issue in gaming for probably years to come, and this is going to go all the way to the Supreme Court. This is a little bit different in that it has so many heavy hitters. DraftKings and FanDuel in the DFS era in 2013, 14, 15, that was a big deal. These are much bigger deals, and you have huge institutions like the New York Stock Exchange and all that investing hundreds of millions of dollars in these. You have the president's son involved. You have these CFTC, the regulatory body for the prediction markets, which is realistically under the current Trump administration going to be very favorable to them. So it's ultimately going to come down to the Supreme Court. They're going to have to rule one way or another. And it's just an interesting thing with it. You touched earlier about underdog and all these different things with it. Well, it's, it's different ways of looking at it. Is it legal? If you really looked at it, is daily fantasy sports a form of gambling? I think you could argue that it is. Is your March Madness bracket pool in your office, is that a form of gambling? Well, you absolutely could argue that it is if you look at it, but is the stock market gambling? It's just a really large existential question. There's always going to be, tying into the innovation angle of it, there's always going to be ways to work around it. In California, we mentioned those card rooms have been finding new ways to offer blackjack for 25 years. And each time they come up with a new one, it gets challenged and they come up with a new one. It's always going to be there. So right now, prediction markets, which is a huge deal with it because of their popularity, because of all the money that's going into it. When you look at those, absolutely, they look like sports books. And I would recommend anybody viewing this to at least play around with them and to see what we're talking about. Go to one of the big prediction markets. You can see it looks just like sports betting. But is there a way to get around it? Absolutely. If they argue successfully in court, they come up with a favorable court in the Supreme Court in the U.S. They come up with regulators that are more favorable towards it. I mean, it's just, it's with it. I think there was a very good chance that you could look at daily fantasy sports back in the day and argue that was gambling and ban it and everything with it. Some states did. New York did, even in Nevada, they don't it's considered a form of gambling. That's why DraftKings and FanDuel aren't there. It's part of the reason why. It's because if they did go to Nevada, they'd have to get gambling licenses. That would jeopardize everything else in their DFS regulations in every other state that they're alive in. So it's an ongoing question. It's people getting paid much more than anyone else in this panel talking today to try to figure this out. It'll be going on. And, if I had a prediction market that offered me when this is settled, I would say 2028 is when the Supreme Court ruling will come down. Summer 2028 is when we get a final decision on what this is going on with these.
So in the meantime, is it just a mad dash, Jeff, to try to acquire as many users as possible, get people on that platform?
It certainly seems that way. And in that way, again, it's very reminiscent of DFS, where it probably is very helpful to you to be one of the first movers and to get people onto your platform. Because again, Ryan's right. This is going to take a long time to be officially sorted through the courts. There's a lot of litigation, a lot of billable hours being racked up. And so in the meantime, though, it's, you're allowed to operate where you're allowed to operate. There are some states where Nevada, one of them, where there's been some interesting court decisions where it looks like one prediction market has, had its wings kind of clipped for the moment. But, it's just, I think it is a huge advantage here. And that's why you see too, they're the one kind of elephant in the room right now is Polymarket, which is, they've technically been offshore since 2022 when they were, hit with sanctions by the CFTC. They're working their way back onto the shore. They bought a regulated entity onshore that through which they can probably relaunch. But it seems like right now the federal government is shut down in the U.S., so that appears to be holding things up. But they're coming, and so they also too have this pre-existing customer base that they can bring with them. And again, very DFS-like in that they kind of have that reputation with users. And it's kind of interesting too with prediction markets in that you are seeing sports bettors or people who would want to bet on sports take advantage of them, particularly in the sharp community. It seems like sharps have they finally found a home in some ways where they get limited everywhere else. At least they can turn to prediction markets and there's somebody there who might take their action. But there's also too this kind of unique, different population of traders that are on these platforms who are people who may not necessarily have a whole lot of interest in sports or sports betting, but do like the event contract trading situation and are now kind of migrating some of that interest over into sports as well. So it's a really interesting mix. And I do think there are some advantages to getting there first, which is why you're even seeing DraftKings and FanDuel, while they're not willing to just go ahead and launch sports event contracts and do this de facto sports wagering in all 50 states, they're positioning themselves to do so. And at the very least to offer event contracts for trading that may not have anything to do with sports, that are tied instead to economics or entertainment and things like that, to at least have, a toe in the game here.
So this is a big thing. I actually saw today, Adam Barrick was just hired as Kalshi's head of sports partnerships. Now, Adam was the one I did my deal with at DraftKings 7 years ago. Adam's a real good dude. He knows a ton about this. So it's interesting to see Kalshi make that move right now to bring on someone with a ton of experience, operational experience, and a lot of relationships within the community. So I wonder if you're going to see more of these prediction markets almost revert back, Ryan, to like it was 10 years ago, which could be good news for me and people like me that, hey, maybe we need to go to the Pat Mayos of the world or the fantasy footballers or just, the people that you see on YouTube who talk about a lot of this stuff. Maybe that's where the better money is spent on some of these partnerships.
Absolutely. They're jumping in. They're getting people with credibility. Sarah Slane, who was with the American Gaming Association back in the DFS pre-PASPA overturn days, is now with one of the prediction markets, is a really credible source. You see on Twitter, several of the big sports betting influencers are being sponsored by prediction markets. Exactly, these partnerships, people with credibility in the industry, they're gearing up for it. They are not slowing down. They are going full steam ahead. These outsiders, they are confident in that they're going to be ultimately vindicated in the courts. They are the ones suing. They're not being sued. They are, in some cases they are, but they're more often than not going after Nevada and New Jersey, states that are gambling states, and saying, we have every right to be here because you do not control us. We are controlled by the federal government. And that's going to be the central question is what role the state regulators have. It goes into the 10th Amendment and a whole bunch of legal stuff that I don't fully understand with it. But this is going to be a big deal with it. They're going with it. And I think Jeff just touched on it. For me personally and for the industry, my big question now comes, what do DraftKings and FanDuel do? They're absolutely they're looking, they're close. And the question in sports right now, it's not as big a deal for Taylor Swift albums and presidential election stuff like that. It's sports, and do they do it? The state regulators, which get tax money from these sports books, are saying, do not do it. If you jump into prediction markets, we're going to take away your license in sports. So they do not want to risk that, obviously, but they are looking closely. And if for years these prediction markets are able to run without impunity because they're awaiting, they're not getting stopped, they're awaiting a court decision, FanDuel and DraftKings are going to be looking on the sideline. It's sort of like the SpongeBob meme of Squidward watching Patrick and SpongeBob. For anyone who's as online as I am, they're going to be watching them, just wonder, saying, look at the opportunities we're lost here. And again, if it's going to be 2027, 2028, how big a deal this is going to be. And they have to take a risk, a gamble, pun intended, on, do we pull the trigger on this and risk it? Does it blow up in our face with the Supreme Court rule against us? Do we jeopardize everything? Or they have to look at these upstarts like the Poly Markets and Kalshis. We're going to see more of these companies come in, get the market share and dominate in it's half the country. California and Texas alone is more than 1/4 of the U.S. population. Half the states don't have access to legal mobile sports betting. You're missing out on all that. And these Kalshi and Poly Market are going. They're going to keep on growing and growing and growing. Each week we already see that. So that is really the huge question. It's the industry overall, but DraftKings and FanDuel have 70% market share in the U.S. Do they ultimately pull the trigger on prediction markets, sports? And that changes everything that people like Jeff and I have worked on since before 2018 and the state-by-state rollout.
Well, Jeff, let's say, I don't know if this would work and this would cause them problems. I'm sure if it didn't, they probably would have done it already, or this is what they're setting up to do. But take like the pick'em games that in some states you can't do pick'em, you need to do pari-mutuel pick'em. So on Underdog, instead of playing a pick'em game against the house, you're playing it against other people in the champions format. That is their way of being allowed to operate in those states. Could DraftKings and FanDuel, and I mean Underdog already has one, so I know that they're looking into it as well, a prediction market app for the states that don't have legal betting yet keep the sports book in the states where it is legal, pay the taxes on those instead of completely flipping over to just being a prediction market type app. And that way you could try to have the best of both worlds where you fend off these prediction market apps in areas where you're not in, yet keeping the good graces of the places that have legalized gambling already.
I mean, I think that is something that they would have to think about because the markets, in California and Texas are potentially so lucrative that, I'm sure the thought is crossing their mind, but they're being warned by state regulators right now against, diving into that business and being warned that they could potentially face, licensing issues down the road if they're doing that, because these state regulators, they factor in a lot of different things when they're looking to give you a license or to renew your license, including how you behave in other jurisdictions. And so while you could do that, and, if you listen to, DraftKings or FanDuel talk about prediction markets, they feel like the real advantage they have is the fact that they can be in these states where DraftKings and FanDuel can't offer online sports betting. They have to also protect what they have, and they're being warned very sternly about doing that. So I think right now what you're seeing is them trying to determine exactly where, the invisible electric fence is for them. Can we maybe get away with taking bets on the Grammys or the Oscars in Texas, but not do sports and still stay in the good graces of New York and Illinois and everyone else? So we'll see. It's a very risky gambit, and for some operators, it's a risk that perhaps they're willing to take because they're smaller, they're hungry, or they don't have as many licenses to worry about, or they're just not doing online sports betting the same way DraftKings and FanDuel are. But it's a very risky situation, especially too while so much of this is still up in the air in the courts. Like, we have all these different cases going on, and eventually I'm sure it'll come to a head before the Supreme Court, as Ryan pointed out earlier. Could take years for that to happen, but you can't quite just totally abandon what you're doing, and that might happen if you just jump too fully into prediction markets. And again, we don't really know for sure, because you don't really know until you ask. There could be the potential for them to just try to ask for forgiveness instead of permission in some ways. But again, just a lot of risk there.
It feels, Ryan, like they would almost have to do that so they don't get boxed out in these markets.
Well, again, that's the conundrum, right? That's what they're facing. We know if DraftKings or FanDuel launched a prediction market in California today, they open up California, which their tribes are incredibly well organized and will attack them with everything they have to keep them out. They will lose any chance of legalizing sports in California, probably forever. And then they also will lose their licenses in New York, New Jersey, Pennsylvania, Michigan, every other state will throw them out. That's a huge important thing that Jeff brought up, but it can't be stressed enough. It's each state regulator that they're legalized, and DraftKings and FanDuel are in 25 plus states. If you mess up in one, they lose it all. So it's just, you have that risk of you're losing. For DraftKings and FanDuel, it's $50 billion in revenue if they opened up a prediction market. But
hold on. Let's say they did that. Let's say they did the prediction market route and just said, fuck it. We're not a sports book anymore. We're a prediction market. We don't have to pay taxes in Illinois or New York anymore. We're just going to operate, and this is how it is.
Yeah, and then you could lose everything. That's the risk. They got to look at it, and they could be vindicated in the court. They could just say, we're a prediction market. It's also that's like the cataclysm, right? That's the meteor hitting this all. If the Supreme Court rules prediction markets have full impunity, they can do everything with it. No sports book will ever operate as a sports book again. They'll just call themselves a prediction market because it's so much easier than dealing with the state regulations, which are just really intense and different by every state with it. So yeah, that's the risk they have, but they could also just miss it and they could lose everything if they jump into it. And that's the big question. Personally, I think for my analysis, they are going to wait. They're going to be strong enough, and then they're going to hope, that it goes with it, but because it's too big a risk just to blow this all up. I would be really surprised if one of the big sports books, FanDuel and DraftKings, which have the majority share, if they're like, what, we're going in. The other thing with it too is so FanDuel has a partnership with one of the CFTC regulated prediction markets, a little bit, something with that. You can't just launch one. You do have to be approved. There's a long process. Now you can acquire one, which is another option. You could look at there's also rumors and chats, and these are rumors that they try to buy one of the big boys or merge with them. That's one of the options. There's so much that goes with it, but it just, again, if the Supreme Court rules against them, the chaos that you've ruined everything with it. And I think at the moment, it's not worth it. But yeah, they are keenly watching as these big prediction markets are going crazy in Texas and California. They're going crazy in legal sports betting states too. The benefit is that it's just a long term. And I will say, by going crazy, there's still it's hard to look at it that their handle totals aren't comparable necessarily to what we see for traditional handle in sports books. The volume that they have is not anywhere close to what we're seeing with sports books, but it is growing. This reputation is gonna build up. It's just gonna get bigger. It's they're in a tough spot right now, and I think we're seeing that this is stock week. We saw that the PENN earnings announcement in ESPN was in conjunction with their stock. We have DraftKings today, later today on Thursday. We have FanDuel Flutter next week. They're going to be asked about it. It's a big concern, and their stocks have been hammered in the past few months, and that's a big reason. Is this missing out on the future?
No, we're getting choppy on Ryan, the internet feed. The prediction markets are coming for him, Jeff. They're taking him down. I'll leave you with this. Let me ask you this. What do you think is more likely to happen first? A sports league does a deal with one of these prediction markets as a sponsor, like a major deal, or we get some sort of. I always thought ESPN Bet would have it, but obviously that's not going to happen. Maybe Amazon signs a deal where you can have a broadcast, basically the gambling broadcast overlay on your screen. So have like a ticker and be able to make bets through the screen that way.
Well, I haven't answered your question because it's already been answered. The NHL has a partnership with Kalshi and Polymarket. They've already struck that deal, and it created a little bit of a furor over it. You know, the American Gaming Association was not happy because the NHL, by doing that, kind of lent its legitimacy to these things, while the legitimacy of them is being attacked by the American Gaming Association and others in court. And so it was a very it was a bit of a shock. I know I was a bit shocked by it, but also too, I can kind of see it from the NHL's perspective, where they are kind of the kid brother of the major leagues in the US. They don't get as much attention from bettors in the US. In Canada, obviously a bit more. So they're not so worried there. But, you know, this was a US facing partnership with those prediction markets. So for them, I think they just thought, and I'm just kind of trying to read between the lines of the deal. They thought, get ourselves out in front of some of these traders on these prediction market platforms, and maybe we can, just draw more attention to our games that way. Because again, they're not football in the U.S. They'll never be football, but there is a way for them perhaps to get a little bit more attention paid to them through prediction markets, and so that they made these deals, and people winced a little bit when it happened. People in the traditional gambling space, but it's already happened.
All right, well, Ryan, I'll leave you with this. Tell everyone where you can find your work, your Twitter handle, the best place to contact you if they got any tips, and maybe one final thing that we didn't touch on that you wanted to bring up. Floor is yours.
Oh, yeah. Well, first, go for Jeff's. Go find him at Covers, me as well, covers.com. You can look at covers.com/news as well. And then me at Butler Bets on Twitter, where I spend too much time there. But if you want some more of the information, please jump on and follow with it. But yeah, I think we hit everything with it. It just, RIP ESPN Bet. It was a hell of a run. We'll see. The score bet is coming up. I would think the one thing, just for anyone concerned, is that it is just going to flip right over, and just to make that clear. Unlike when there was pauses between the transition from Barstool to ESPN Bet, on December 1st, ESPN Bet will switch over. It is going to be right there for the score bet. So take a look. So you don't have to worry about cashing out. You don't have to worry about your funds being seized. Your future bets are still there. Every single thing that you saw with ESPN Bet is going to be there, just with some different branding, maybe some different colors. So just for anyone concerned, that was been the biggest thing on Twitter, besides all the other chaos and prediction markets and ESPN Bet's failure and the rest of the world. This is the big thing to look at, is that if you have an ESPN Bet account with money in it or futures, what have you, it is going to be good to go. It'll just be under the score.
Jeff, do you want to leave Ontario, come to whatever province is going to be closest to you, and bet on the Loney Bowl AUS football at coolbet.com with me?
I mean, as an alum of the prestigious St. Mary's University, Robie Street High, I would love to get a little bit down on that game.
You know what? As both alums, we're 7-point favorites against St. FX this weekend.
I know. I was talking with a friend today from Andy Ganesh, and I just was asking him for his lay of the land. He didn't seem too optimistic about X, but Cool Bet used to be great for that. Cool Bet used to be great. They have great CIS lines, so I'll give them a tip of the cap there for sure. I mean, if we're signing off, I'll say too. Covers.com. Industry news section. We're following all this stuff every day. This is the busiest year we've ever had for it. It's just nonstop news all the time. So there's something new there every day. And as for one thing we haven't talked about that I would just like to do, this is partly a selfish thing, but also I know there are a lot of PME listeners who are daily fantasy players, and that word daily fantasy players in Ontario. And I would like to tell you, because you ask me often through Twitter, often reply to tweets that have nothing to do with Ontario DFS, but there is no update yet to give there. We are still awaiting a decision by the Court of Appeal in Ontario over whether we can connect Ontario iGaming with other jurisdictions like in the US that could perhaps allow for a return of DFS to Ontario. So there is no update. If there is an update, I will be sure to tweet it, to write about it, to let everyone know. I will shout it from the rooftops. I will go up to the CN Tower and scream it from there. I will let you know. There is no update right now, though. But there will be an update at some point, and I will let you know, I swear. And I'll tell Pat, and Pat will let you know, because I know his listeners and his viewers really like DFS, and it's still being looked at by judges. So there will be an update at some point, and we'll let you know for sure.
I just hope a decision comes either way before I retire from this podcast.
It's almost, we're coming up on a year. I think it's a year at the end of this month that we're waiting for this decision. But again, it's a very novel thing. They're looking at it. There will be an update, and Pat will let you know. I will let you know. Ryan will let you know, because I'm going to tell it to Ryan too. He'll let the people of Florida know about it. Everyone will know. We'll know when we know, though.
We have a lot of part-time Canadians here. They'll be very excited.
It's true. I hadn't thought about that. Yeah, they would be very excited. I mean, they're probably all like 80 years old, don't know what the hell you're talking about. But, do you meet a lot of young Canadians who are in Florida, or a lot of old Canadians?
Never anyone under the age of 60.
That tracks to me. Anyway, guys, thanks so much for coming on impromptu. Thanks for getting back to me so quickly. Put this together, going live. So really appreciate you coming on. Covers.com, the news section. You can find both Jeff and Ryan's work over there, and follow them both on Twitter. You can follow me at the PME, sub to Mayo Media Network, and we'll get back to our regularly scheduled programming ASAP. The best bets is already out for Thursday. Those DraftKings and DFS picks coming Friday, update on Saturday, live show on Sunday, and a Red Zone watch along at the beginning of kickoff at 1 p.m. Eastern time on Sunday as well, all on Mayo Media Network. Okay, you might as well subscribe and tune in. I'm Pat Mayo.